Good afternoon, and welcome then to chapter 13 of this series of classes for Master 1 Enseignement. I'm going to continue with another group of immigrants to Britain before going on to the question of the history of racism and anti-racism. And so this is the history of Caribbean immigration to Britain, or as the expression is still often used, West Indian. Of course, West Indian was historically a mistake. We are told that when Columbus went, which way did he go? Went west, and he thought that he was going to arrive in India, but in fact he arrived in the Caribbean and named it the West Indies. Yeah, the West Indies and West Indians. And this is still often used today, even though it's actually rather strange way of looking at it. Now, the first West Indians and Africans, indeed, who were seen in Britain would be as slaves. The British Empire was massively involved in the slave trade, and indeed cities like Bristol and Birmingham were very much built on the money, and Liverpool very much built on the money from the slave trade. This little symbol we have to look at that time is the symbol of the anti-slavery movement, which really gets started towards the end of the 18th century. Very, very small movement at the beginning. I think in the first meeting there were 12 of them, and they were up against this enormous and very prestigious trade, a very, very profitable trade. And they were at the origin. The movement in Britain was at the origin of what may be the first political logo. This one of the slave in chains with the slogan, "Am I not a man and a brother?" So a vaguely Christian slogan saying that that slaves ought to be treated like human beings. Now, the slave trade lasted for a long time. The slave trade was eventually abolished in the British Empire in 1880, in the first decade of the 19th century. But slavery for a few years after that, it was illegal for somebody to trade you as a slave, but it was still legal for them to have you as a slave. And it's only in 1833, I'm fairly sure, that slavery is abolished in the British Empire. Now, slavery was abolished, no doubt, for three reasons, maybe four reasons. The first one is the slave revolts around, whether it would be in Jamaica or Trinidad, etc. It made it more and more difficult for the slave owners to control the situation. The second one was a mass movement in Britain, very strong in the working class industrial areas, and the first mass working class campaign ever to exist in Britain. And the third reason is it was becoming more difficult to make money through slavery, and free labor could be more profitable in certain situations. And the fourth reason is that there were people in Parliament who were opposed to the West Indian slave owners for other reasons. And therefore were happy to see the abolition of slavery come and weaken their power. Although the abolition of slavery, it's difficult to be very proud of Britain for this, because when they decided to abolish slavery, they did not pay compensation to the slaves, they paid compensation to the slave owners, and a very large amount of money it was too. During the campaign against slavery, quite naturally, the majority of the leaders were white middle class people, because it was easier for them to do things. But there were a couple of notable things about the campaign against slavery. First of all, the real importance of the ladies' committees. In many towns, there would be a man's committee and a ladies' committee. This was because in many parts of the population, it wasn't acceptable for men and women to go together to political meetings or knocking on doors, trying to get support and so on. And very often the ladies committees were more radical and refused some of the suggestions to improve the situation of slaves without abolishing slavery. This was a time of enormous debate. There were dozens and dozens of pamphlets written against slavery, and dozens of pamphlets written in favor of slavery, saying that the slaves were happy, and so on and so forth. And most of the elite of the society was involved in slavery. There's been a big debate recently about what Jane Austen thought of slavery, but if you're a great Jane Austen fan, you may not want to know everything about this. Interestingly enough, there are also some pamphlets written saying, oh, well, you can't really be for slavery or against slavery. The truth lies in the middle way, which I always thought was fascinating. In any case, this gentleman, Oludo Equiano, is one of the leaders, because not all the leaders were white. A few leaders were black, and Oluda Equiano was one of the leaders. He would go from town to town speaking against slavery. He was rather lucky in that he got taught to read and write in a church context, as I understand correctly, and he became a very well-known leader then in the 18th century of the anti-slavery movement. And that's it. But blue plaque there, where I got the dates right. That's good. He lived and published, and in 1789 he wrote his autobiography and published on the barbarity of slavery. Now we're going to move considerably ahead and move to the 20th century. After the First World War, many Caribbeans were attracted to work opportunities in the chemical factories in various parts of Britain, especially in the Northwest. And after the war, there were quite a number of black dockers in Liverpool, in particular, and unemployment being very high. That one of the results was that some of the white seamen tried to oppose the idea that black seamen should be employed, and so there was a series of racist riots in 1919, and between the wars, between the First World War and the Second World War, there was a steady build-up of discrimination against black workers, and there was very much a color bar. For example, if you wanted to be a nurse, it wasn't going to be possible because they were operating a color bar, only accepting white people. And there were some organizations trying to change the situation. One of them was the League of Colored Peoples, and the League of Colored Peoples was founded in 1931, and it founded its first journal in 1933, which was called The Keys. That was the name of the journal. And indeed there's still a lot of work to do on this. If anybody's interested in researching this journal, I think there's a lot of work to be done yet. I should just point out that the expression colored people is no longer acceptable today in Britain, but at the time this was the expression. Today we say black and colored is considered to be insulting. So what did they do, the League of Colored People? Well, they lobbied and they tried to defend different people. Yeah, so for example, if a nurse was applying for a job and was refused, they would try to take it to the courts. They took the case of the sacked seamen to Parliament, and they also raised money to help poor black people. And this bust that you can see here is to organize holidays for black children who were in the poor parts of town and often couldn't afford a holiday. And in the issue of 1933, in the July issue of the 1933 journal, they had a report on discrimination in hospitals, and they said, yes, one young lady applied to 25 hospitals and was refused by everyone on the grounds of color. So you can see the situation pretty difficult there. You can see one of their meetings organized by the League of Colored People. And this particular meeting is hear about what's happening in Jamaica. So your news from home. Remember, you might by this time have a radio, but you might not. In 1930, there were only 3 million radios in Britain, so lots of people didn't have it. And here you have Una Marson, who was one of the leaders of the League for Colored People. And she was also a playwright, and she staged a play entitled At What Price? And she did that to try to raise money for the League of Colored People. So you see, it was the first. We're talking about a small community, but a community which had some organizations trying to defend themselves against racism. Although I don't know if they used the word racism, they used the word discrimination mostly. Now, in that's the life of Una Marston, then her biography. Now, by the Second World War, the situation got more complicated because in the Second World War, a very large number of children were taken out of the cities and taken to the countryside, and they'd arrive in the countryside. So, okay, who's got a spare room? We think you have a spare room. You must take one of the children. And so this was obligatory, and this was wartime. The cities were dangerous because of the bombing, and so you got this massive evacuation that's called evacuation, which was obviously a terrible shock to the children, and rather strange for the people in the middle class families taking them in as well. There's a lot of social mixing. These were people that these were middle class people in the villages who probably would never see a working class person. And again, one of the big problems that they had, and this was a report in the journal again, is that they had tremendous problems because when they came to a village and they were sorting out the children, village after house refused to have black children. So that's really a pretty heartbreaking situation. It was when the Second World War was over, though, that we saw the biggest movement, the biggest migration of people from Jamaica, Trinidad, and so on to Britain, and this has often been symbolized by the ship, the Windrush, or to be more precise, the Empire Windrush, which arrived in Britain in 1948, carrying 492 passengers from Jamaica. You can see some of them there, almost all men. There may be one or two women I can't see very well there, so practically all men, wishing to start a new life in the United Kingdom. Now, they were either going to, some of them might be thinking of making some money and then going back home, and others were thinking of making some money, getting somewhere nice to live, and then inviting their family over. And I've already mentioned to you the video Back in Time for Brixton, which you can find on YouTube, and which is very useful from this point of view. So this was the first large group. So this has become the symbol, and indeed, as you can see, that's the list of the people who were there. Now, it was quite difficult for them when they arrived because at home in Jamaica, they had learned in school that Britain is wonderful, that it's the mother country, and so on, and they really were not expecting to find severe racism. They weren't expecting it, and so it was a terrible shock for them. Now, by the time the Second World War ended, then there was a real need for labour in Britain, and the government worked very hard to encourage Jamaicans and other people from the Caribbean to come over. And indeed, they were welcomed because they were needed. So even the Daily Express had a friendly headline when the Windrush arrived. 450 arrive, a sympathetic article. The number of people arriving rose very quickly. In 1955, 28,000 migrants came, and by 1960, 50,000, and the following year, 66,000. Now, it had already started going down when the Commonwealth Immigrants Act was passed in 1962, but we will talk about that a little bit later. Many of the people who arrived, well, they found jobs very easily in the 1950s, often porters, street cleaners, factory and building site earners, but especially in the public sector, where the large and bureaucratic ways of recruiting people left less space for racism. So it was often London transport, bus drivers, and nursing was very much a favourite place to work. But there was also the car factories, because cars, of course, the number of cars being built in Britain was going up very quickly. Very often they lived in really very, very poor housing, and if they wanted to get better housing once they got a little bit of money, they often found that there were signs up saying no blacks. So they would quite often go to parts of town where there were already people from home and where the landlords were more positive. So people from Trinidad went to Notting Hill. People from St. Vincent went to High Wycombe, and Jamaicans went to Wolverhampton. And so very much they went by group so as to feel a little bit more at home. So very large amounts of discrimination in the 50s. And I will come back to this when I talk about the history of racism and anti-racism. The first, in the 1960s and 70s, there were a couple of examples of black workers organizing strikes. For example, in May 1965, an important strike in Preston. And unfortunately, the trade unions were not really interested in supporting black workers, and I will come back to that. I will come back to that later on. In any case, politically, the next generation, the children of immigrants, were less keen on the idea of keeping their heads down and keeping quiet, and you did have some more radical groups, such as this group, Black Power in Britain, the Universal Coloured People's Association. This would be the early 70s. The Notting Hill Festival, well, this is actually a festival in Leeds, but the use of the festival was a tremendously important part of Caribbean culture in Britain. Now, the very first one was the Notting Hill Festival, then in Carnival, the Notting Hill Carnival, which began in 1958 as a political response to racism, but which was a community festival, which was not specifically West Indian, but which later on became the Caribbean Festival, and today has, you know, millions of people. Well, I should say about 500,000 people coming to it. I'll see if I can get you, put you up an article on that. So the carnival was a tradition from the Caribbean, which had some roots back in Africa, from pre-slavery times, and so it's become very important. There's something tremendously important about the carnival, because it's not just about singing our music and dancing our dances. It's about doing it in the streets. So it's about saying, this is our home, and we like to make a noise sometimes and be very visible. Yeah, so it's, although it's fundamentally for fun, it also has very important political meaning symbolically. And indeed, in the 50s and 60s, the racists didn't like it. And in the 70s, the police tried to stop it. But since the 90s, it's become almost semi-official, and the carnivalers go into schools to explain how to make the costumes and so on. And the police are completely different today with the Notting Hill Carnival than they were in the 70s. But Notting Hill 2005, you can see that it has a certain number of people involved. So I just wanted to present a small number of Caribbeans in Britain who've contributed in different ways. These are sculptures by Ronald Moody. And there's a book by C.L.R. James. Now, C.L.R. James then was a rather unusual gentleman in that he was both a far-left activist, a Trotskyist, and a cricket journalist. He wrote articles about cricket, and now in the Caribbean, as in India and Pakistan, cricket is extremely popular. You know, although I'm one of those people who think that the British Empire fundamentally did not bring anything good, cricket is maybe the one exception. And here you have a collection of his cricket writings, C.L.R. James. Now, over the last 20, 30 years, there's been an attempt to work on Black British history, and here you have a recent Black British History News Perspectives. There's also been a certain, I mean, I already mentioned the carnivals, but there's also been more and more visibility for Afro-Caribbean culture in Britain. And I have two examples here, in fact. First of all, you can see that every year there is Black History Month, where there are a series of events in schools, in universities, in libraries, to say, let's make sure that when we're looking to the past of Britain, we're not forgetting part of the population, and let's make sure that when black children in Britain go to school, they're not just learning about what white people did in the past. So that's one example, the Black History Month, and but also this actual radio station, Radio 1 Extra, was invented in some ways to specialize in black music. So again, this is another aspect of multiculturalism. I think when we talk about multiculturalism, it's very important not to define it too quickly, because it is in fact a cloud of many, many dozens of different ways of doing things, of cultural practices and ideas. And not everybody agrees, it's not monolithic, which exist in Britain. So for example, this is Public Radio, BBC, a specialized radio station for black music. And here you have, what do you have here? Here you have the schedule for 1 Extra. So this is 1 Extra, the radio station. So you can see there what we have here. It's mostly music, of course, because this is a popular radio. And you can see here you have a series of the disc jockeys and so on throughout the night. So you have 1 Extra mixes in the morning, very, very early in the morning, and Destination Africa, Queen Niger, and Jams. And you can see that almost everybody presenting is black. And so this one might imagine this launching debates about whether it wouldn't be better to have more black people on the mainstream radio and not run the risk of specializing black disc jockeys in the black radio. And there's a lot to be said about that. Another couple of elements of black culture in Britain today. Here you have a poster from the poster says "No to cuts, no to racism," so it is a political poster. And this is a small organization, a network. I don't know how many they are, but it's influential but small. And it's black activists rising against cuts. And so you'd have to translate this into French as militants noirs en lutte contre l'austérité. And so this is again another example of a multicultural approach, in that a series of activists decided that when you talk about cuts, about austerity, you often find that in the working class parts of town, it's even worse for black people, because black people are in the poorer sectors. They depend more on public transport, they depend more on public medicine, and so on and so forth. And so they decided it'd be good to have an organization which underlines the special effects on black people. And so Barak works with other groups. They work very much with trade unions. They work with the black sections within trade unions. Many trade unions have special places to organize black people, not permanently separate, but for example, many trade unions will have once a year a weekend which is just for black members to discuss problems of racism and their own problems. So this is all very much multiculturalism. Remember that multiculturalism is not just something which is in the laws in Britain, it's something that people do. Another example here, that this is the what's the word? This is the Voice. So this is the black newspaper in Britain, the best known black newspaper in Britain. This interesting article is saying, why don't you spend money in places which supports the idea that Black Lives Matter? And this is an example of what I just mentioned. That is to say that this is from a trade union, very big trade union. Unison have over 1 million members. And this is their black members group. They have a black members group, so no doubt with hundreds or maybe probably thousands of members. And so they organize things specially for the black members to make sure that in a society which is still racist, that the priorities of black members are not forgotten. Yes. And so here you can look this up, and many other trade unions will also have a black members group. And that's an extremely rapid introduction to Black people in Britain, just very, very, very short indeed. And the idea being, to come back to the question of the exam, of course, is that within the theme of inclusion et diversité, obviously the experience of Black people is important. And so what I propose to do is to put this video obviously online, but also 2 or 3 documentaries about Black people in Britain. And that's why I won't be making a second one myself for this week. I will be adding other things. So that's all for now. And the next time I do a video, this will be about the history of racism and anti-racism in Britain. Some key dates, I think about 20 key dates. Okay, so thank you for listening, and I will see you in class at the appropriate time, which is up on the blog. Thank you. Goodbye for now.